Hi. So look, it's the eve of the anniversary of the Russian invasion. Ukraine has suffered dreadfully over the past year, but it's astonished the world, hasn't it, with its resistance and its spirit in the face of this powerful, ruthless Russian aggression.
Absolutely. One of the questions that gets asked regularly, are analysts surprised it's lasted a year? And actually, in a way, Putin would have hoped it was over in days, not months. But the Ukrainian resilience, their resistance, their courage and tenacity has meant that actually not only have they held their own, but with West support, they've managed to push the Russian might back. And let's face it, this is a big Soviet army against a smaller Soviet army. One would reasonably expect the large Soviet army under Putin to have prevailed. But I think what we're seeing is a stark contrast between, Russia has these big military parades, they showcase all their equipment and their tanks and everything. There's more than equipment that goes into military capability, and their army has been woeful in its performance. They're fighting a 20th century sort of battle,
Yes.
heavily attritional, whereas Ukraine has just prevailed and done an outstanding job.
It's often said these coming weeks could be critical. I'd love to hear your analysis of that. What are the variables that will determine of the importance and the way these coming weeks play out?
Well, there's always a danger of being too specific. Well, my big theme here is that Russia would have hoped to have secured victory immediately. The one thing that's changed the game is Western support in high-tech weapons. It's allowed precision strike. It's allowed a smaller country like Ukraine to actually have a much bigger effect. The trouble is those precision weapons are not available in big supplies. You can't go down to the supermarket and buy them. The West has been emptying its war stocks, taking risk against the levels of weapons that it has to
Mm.
support Ukraine. Why that's important the next few weeks is there's already examples. America stopped giving us some anti-tank weapons because it's now run its stock so low. If the West stops supporting or starts to turn the tap on some of this support, the advantages that Ukraine has gained will diminish immediately, and ultimately the might of Russia will prevail. It's really important that the West keeps its resolve, maintains its appetite for the long haul. There's all sorts of domestic issues we have in this country, as have a lot of the allies, of high energy prices, inflation, NHS, or whatever. But if we take up our eye off this ball in Ukraine, all this effort will have been for naught, and Ukraine ultimately
Yes.
will fall to Russia.
And President Biden's visit to Ukraine and then on to Warsaw in the last couple of days, that was obviously important in acting as the glue in the alliance. And Britain's played a significant role in that too. How do you read the strength of that alliance now?
Well, the very fact we're talking about alliance, I think is fascinating. Just the speeches. Biden did his speech. It was all about teamwork. He was surrounded by international leaders, by people. He was upbeat. He was talking about principles. Whereas Putin was only talking to a select group of Russians. He was full of lies. It was full of blame. It was full of downbeat rhetoric. He was looking down all the time, not looking up. I think just the dynamics of the various roles here. Putin is trying to play Russia as the one under threat. It's NATO against Russia, and completely ignoring the fact that Putin was the one who invaded a sovereign country unprovoked, and now is having the Western world rally to try to support Ukraine to correct that evil. And the dynamics of the two are really stark.
Now, I want to just get your thoughts on British strategy more broadly, because we're waiting for the rewrite of the Integrated Defence and Strategic Review. John Bew, the distinguished historian, has a key role in all of that. What's the outcome you wish to see from that?
Um, Well, the trouble is, I'm a bit schizophrenic on this because, as a military guy, I'd always like to see more money in defence. But frankly, I'm also a taxpayer, and I realise that we've got huge challenges: NHS, cost of living, etc. So part of it is about spending our money smarter. But for me, there's a fundamental change. I was involved in defence planning, how they fund defence, which is the sorts of threats that exist, what capabilities you need to address those threats. And one of the things we never foresaw was a European war of this scale. So our war stocks are tiny compared to the rate that munitions are being used at the moment. And it's only the number of artillery shells being used is each day far exceeds the number that a factory in America can make in a month. There are basic assumptions that we need to correct. President Putin's invasion has been a wake up call to Europe. And that, I'm afraid, will probably mean a complete review of the size and scale of our military, not just the people, the equipment, the technology, and our war stocks. These weapons cost a lot of money, but actually, if we don't have them, the price we pay is significantly greater. So I think there's an interesting conversation to come. This isn't about slightly turning the dials. This has fundamentally rewritten
Mm.
the landscape of defence. And if I may, John, I also think there's a worrying trend here. If Putin does in any way prevail in this war, then he's already dealing with North Korea and Iran. There's an axis of evil starting to brew as an alternative alliance to NATO.
Yes.
China is trying to sit on the fence. If China decides that actually it's going to supply weapons to Russia, suddenly we create two very different tectonic plates, and that will be a dark cloud over international security for some time to come.
Yes, it's now common for Western NATO European leaders to say that Ukraine must win this war. I wonder if it's possible to look through the eyes of Putin. I wonder what victory, what success looks like for him at this stage in the conflict.
I think winning is a difficult. As an analyst, I don't know what winning really looks like anymore because both sides will have lost, huge amounts. I think for the international community, we look at it winning differently than Putin. Putin will be looking at it about his own survival, and therefore it's got to be winning that he can sell to his domestic audience, which frankly are not being told the truth anyway, as some sort of victory. And therefore, even if all Putin secure is Crimea and part of Donbass,
Mm.
I've no doubt that he will declare some form of success to this operation. The fact is, though, that tactically he may well have gained a bit of ground, but strategically he wanted to make Russia great again. He's been pilloried on the world stage. He
Mm.
wanted to stop the expansion of NATO. NATO will expand as a result of this. It's very difficult to see how Putin's Russia will benefit in the long term from this at all.
Interesting, because we listen to the rhetoric, and we know rhetoric is rhetoric, certainly in the case of Vladimir Putin, but the grand sweeping rhetoric in his State of the Nation speech the other day, which echoed previous speeches by Putin. But you feel in his mind, and I know the difficulty, of course, of reading Putin's mind, but you feel it's gone from hyper aggression to a sort of ultimate defense, where he's considering his own survival as leader of Russia and what he can sell to the people of Russia and those around him by way of justification for this failed operation, this failed war.
Yeah, the trouble is, John, we tend to try and paint the black and white, the extremes of this. I think the reality is Putin still sees himself as a sort of Peter the Great, one of the great Russian tsars of old, and wants to restore the former Soviet Union. He's made that quite clear in his speeches, in his rhetoric, and and the great thing about autocracies versus democracies is they have time. We have a political cycle every 4 years, 5 years, the government changes. So they find it very difficult to think strategically. Russia it can think in terms of decades rather than years. And therefore, any footprint forward, any step forward, whether it's Crimea, part of the Donbass, another step to re-establishing that great Soviet Union, I have no doubt that in Putin's mind, he will paint and to his people as one step along the road and a step to restore Russian greatness. The fact that he's becoming a pariah in the global stage, the fact that this will damage their economy potentially fatally in the longer term, the fact that the Russian people eventually will learn the truth as these bodies are returned to them and they start to know the truth about what's happening. But for now, in a dictatorial society like Russia, I have no doubt he still sees the positive out of all of this.